If you're over 60 and your typical day involves the same routines, the same television shows, the same comfortable habits, your brain is losing ground, not because you're sick, because you're not giving it a reason to grow. My name is Dr. Nathan Wells. I'm a board-certified internal medicine physician with more than 20 years working specifically with patients in their 60s, 70s, and 80s. Senior brain health isn't a side interest of mine. It's what I've built my entire practice around. I've sat across from hundreds of patients worried about their memory, their sharpness, what's coming, and what I'm about to share with you is the most hopeful and most underused thing the research consistently shows. A landmark study published in JAMA Neurology found that adults who regularly engaged in cognitively stimulating activities in later life reduced their risk of developing Alzheimer's disease by up to 47%, not slowed it, reduced it, nearly cut it in half. That number doesn't come from a supplement company. It comes from peer-reviewed science, and it means that what you choose to do with your mind, starting today, may matter more than almost anything else on your prevention checklist. In this video, I'm going to show you exactly which types of learning rebuild neural pathways in the aging brain, which activities most people assume are helping but aren't, and how little time it actually takes to see real neurological change. And I want to keep one thing in front of you the whole time we're talking. The brain you have at 65 or 72 or 78 is not finished. The research on this is clear. Stay with me. Before I go any further, what I share here is education. It is not a diagnosis of your specific situation. Your own doctor knows your full history, your medications, your circumstances. Think of me as a trusted second opinion, not your prescriber. If you have someone in your life who's been worried about their memory lately, a spouse, a sibling, a friend, send this to them before you keep watching. They need this more than most people realize. Let's start with the myth that does the most damage. Because if you believe it, nothing else I say today will matter. I want to tell you about a patient I'll call Gerald, 72 years old, retired high school administrator. His wife brought him in because she'd noticed he was slower to recall names, took longer to find words mid-conversation. Gerald wasn't panicked about it. He was resigned. My dad had dementia, he told me. I figured it was coming eventually. He'd been retired for 2 years, and his days had settled into a comfortable rhythm. Morning news, lunch, afternoon television, the occasional newspaper. He was well rested, he was relaxed, and his brain, he told me, was finally getting a break after decades of work. That word, break, is where I had to stop him. Your brain does not recover by resting the way an injured knee does. When you rest a knee, tissue repairs. When you rest a brain, when you stop genuinely challenging it, the neural pathways that aren't being used begin to thin. Think of it like a garden hose that goes unused all winter. The rubber doesn't stay supple from sitting there. It stiffens, it cracks. The only thing that keeps it functional is running water through it. Gerald's relaxed routine wasn't protecting his brain, it was quietly working against it. And the most dangerous part was that he felt fine. That's exactly when people don't act. Here is the truth the research has established beyond any serious dispute. The brain retains neuroplasticity, the ability to form new connections and reorganize itself, well into your 80s. This isn't wishful thinking. The National Institute on Aging has documented this repeatedly. The construction crews don't retire, they slow down. But they are still there, waiting for a project. Your job is to give them one. So what actually works? Because this is where most people get derailed. They hear exercise your brain, and they download a word puzzle app or they start doing the daily crossword, and they feel like they've handled it. I want to be careful here because I'm not dismissing those things, but I am telling you they are not enough, and the reason matters. Novelty and complexity. Those are the two variables the NIH's research on cognitive aging keeps landing on, not stimulation in general, novelty and complexity specifically. Doing the same crossword format you've done for 15 years means your brain navigates it on existing roads. It's familiar territory. The brain doesn't build new pathways to handle familiar territory. It maintains old ones at best. What forces your brain to build new connections is the experience of genuinely not knowing how to do something and working through it anyway. The frustration of learning. The effort of struggling with something that doesn't come easily. That friction is the actual signal your brain needs. Without it, you're idling. 4 specific types of learning consistently produce measurable neurological change in older adults. I want to walk through each one clearly because the differences between them matter. The first is learning a new language. No activity in the cognitive neuroscience literature produces more widespread brain changes in older adults than language learning. A study published in Brain and Language found that bilingual older adults showed significantly greater gray matter density in regions responsible for executive function, attention, and memory, compared to those who spoke only one language. When you learn a new language, you're not exercising one part of your brain. You're recruiting the prefrontal cortex, the anterior cingulate, the hippocampus, and the cerebellum at the same time. It's the difference between a single bicep curl and a full-body workout. And here is the point that I cannot emphasize enough. You do not need to become fluent. Fluency is not the medicine. The learning is the medicine. The struggle of holding new vocabulary and working memory. The effort of mapping unfamiliar grammar onto your existing language instincts. The work of training your ear to hear sounds it's never distinguished before. All of that struggle is exactly the neurological signal that triggers pathway construction. I had a patient I'll call Dorothy. 67 years old, retired librarian, came to see me not because she was worried about cognition, but for a routine appointment. She mentioned almost as an aside that she'd started learning Italian. A trip she'd taken with her daughter had lit something in her. She wasn't planning to move there. She wasn't expecting fluency. 20 minutes a day with an app, plus a weekly online lesson with a teacher. That was it. She came back 6 months later, and something on the brief cognitive assessments I run in my office had shifted. Her processing speed was up. Her verbal recall was sharper. She described feeling, in her own words, more awake than I've felt in years. Then she laughed and said Italian words had started appearing in her dreams and she didn't know whether to be thrilled or unsettled. I told her to be thrilled. That was her hippocampus, at 67, building new architecture. But here's something Dorothy told me that most people skip over. The first 3 weeks were miserable. She nearly quit. She felt stupid. She'd review words at night, and by morning they were gone. She told her daughter she was too old for it. Her daughter told her to give it 1 more week. She did. And then something clicked. Not fluency, not even close, but enough forward movement that she stopped dreading the sessions and started looking forward to them. That messy, frustrating 3-week window is exactly where most people stop. It's also precisely where the brain is working hardest. The second type of learning is picking up a musical instrument. The neurological case for this is extraordinary. When you play an instrument, not listen to music but actively play, you simultaneously engage your visual system to read notation, your motor system to coordinate hands and fingers, your auditory system to monitor pitch and timing, and your memory system to retain sequences. A study in the journal Neuropsychologia described active instrument playing as the most comprehensive brain engagement researchers have been able to measure. Nothing else touches as many systems at once. The obstacle I hear most: I'm too old to start. That belief is both understandable and wrong. A 2020 study from the Royal College of Music and Imperial College London followed adults over 60 who took up piano for the very first time. 6 months later, participants showed significant improvements in processing speed, verbal memory, and sustained attention compared to people who hadn't. 6 months. 0 prior experience. The instrument doesn't have to be piano, the harmonica, the ukulele, basic hand percussion. What matters is that your hands are producing sound, and your brain is trying to close the gap between what you intend to play and what actually comes out. That gap is the engine. Now, I promised you early on that I'd tell you about an activity most people abandon before age 30 and almost never think to revisit. And I've been holding it because I want you to understand why it works before I tell you what it is. Because if I just name it, a lot of people will dismiss it as too simple. It's making visual art. Drawing, painting, pottery, not consuming art, making it. Researchers at the University of Erlangen-Nuremberg studied older adults who took up visual art production for the first time and found significantly greater connectivity in what's called the default mode network, the part of the brain most involved in memory consolidation, imagination, and the ability to think about the past and future. That network is among the first to deteriorate in early Alzheimer's, and it responded to making art. In beginners, within weeks. Why does this work when it seems so simple? Because the moment you try to draw something, truly observe it, and then translate that observation through your hand onto paper, your brain is doing something it almost never does in everyday life. It's forcing your visual cortex, your motor cortex, and your working memory to cooperate on a task none of them find automatic. Most seniors haven't used that system deliberately since childhood. The rust is the point. The rebuilding starts the moment you pick up the pencil and struggle. A sketch pad and a basic pencil. 15 minutes a day, drawing anything. A plant on the windowsill, a hand, a coffee cup. That's what we're talking about. Not talent, not classes, unless you want them. Just deliberate attention applied through your hand to something you see. The fourth type is complex motor learning, physical skills that require coordination, sequencing, and real-time adjustment. Dancing is the most studied example. A landmark study published in the New England Journal of Medicine evaluated 11 different leisure activities and their associated effect on dementia risk. Dancing produced the highest reduction of any physical activity they examined, a 76% lower risk compared to non-dancers. 76. That number has replicated across multiple studies since. What makes dancing neurologically unique is that it asks several things of your brain simultaneously. Memorize movement sequences, respond to music in real time, coordinate with a partner, and do all of it while moving through space. Your brain cannot autopilot through that. It has to stay engaged. Ballroom, line dancing, salsa, even learning basic square dance steps, the style is irrelevant. Tai Chi produces similar benefits for closely related reasons. So does learning a new sport you've never played. Pickleball has become popular among older adults partly because of how accessible it is, but neurologically, what's happening is exactly right. Novel motor patterns, real-time reaction, coordination under pressure. Here's what ties all four of these together. And this is what I want to stay with you after this video is over. None of them require talent. None of them require prior experience. Every single one requires that you show up uncomfortable, that you sit with the feeling of being a beginner, that you let your brain work without coming to its rescue. That is the mechanism. That discomfort is not an obstacle to brain health. It is brain health. And before someone tells themselves this sounds like a lot, 20 minutes. That's the threshold the research consistently identifies. 20 minutes of genuine, effortful practice, 5 days a week. That is not a large ask. It is less than a single episode of television. What's different is the quality of engagement. Watching is passive. Struggling is active. Your brain knows the difference. I want to come back to Gerald now, because I left him in a difficult place and he deserves a resolution. Gerald left my office that day, and I wasn't sure he'd do anything differently. He was 72, he was comfortable, and he was convinced his fate was largely written. But his wife had been in the room. And 2 weeks later she called and asked me what she should tell him to try. I suggested a beginner's Spanish class at their local community college. Not an app, not YouTube. A real room with a real teacher and other adults who also didn't know what they were doing. He went. He hated the first month. He told me later he felt ridiculous, mixing up tenses, forgetting words he'd studied the night before. He thought about quitting after the third class. His wife told him that was exactly what she expected him to say, and she drove him to the fourth one. At his follow-up appointment, 8 months later, his wife spoke before he did. She said he was more present at dinner, more interested in things, more curious. She used a phrase I've heard from spouses before, when a patient truly commits to something like this. She said he seemed like he'd woken up. Gerald's cognitive scores hadn't declined the way I'd have anticipated. In 2 domains, verbal recall and processing speed, they had measurably improved. He was 73. He was a beginner. His brain responded exactly the way brains are built to respond when you give them something real to do. This is what I want you to leave with. You cannot control every risk factor for cognitive decline. Genetics, vascular history, certain medications, those aren't fully in your hands. But this is. The choice to keep learning, to stay uncomfortable, to refuse to let your brain coast, that one is entirely yours. The research doesn't tell you it guarantees anything, but it tells you, clearly and consistently, that people who make this choice age differently. They lose less, they hold on longer, they show up to their own lives in a way that passive people don't. One step. Before today is over, write down one thing you've always been curious about but never pursued because it seemed too hard, too late, or too unfamiliar. One language, one instrument, one drawing class, one dance style. Write it down, find the first beginner resource you can, and give it 20 minutes this week. Gerald didn't feel ready either. He went anyway. His brain has been thanking him ever since.